Greetings everyone, this is Lucian Wilson with the Freedom Alternative. I am right in front of the memorial of the communist sacrifice, basically, and this is where we're going to start our exploration of this gorgeous city of Lviv in the far west of Ukraine, the biggest city of western Ukraine. Right across the street from where I am is the Museum of Occupation, mostly of course concentrated upon the tortures applied by the KGB to the locals in here. So without further ado, let's start exploring Lviv, Ukraine. Lviv, the most Ukrainian city in Ukraine and the only place I could buy Putin-themed toilet paper. The place is absolutely magnificent. However, I started my exploration of this city with probably the saddest landmark of the city, but also the most important on my agenda. Nacionalny Muzej Memorial Tiurma na Lontskoho, the Lonsky Prison National Memorial, located at a crossroad between Vulniția Stepana Banderi and Vulniția Brulova, formerly Lontskoho. This 125 years old building complex has been the site of so many horrors that it would deserve its own video, but the filming policies inside are quite strict. Anyway, this prison was used by everyone who occupied this area as a site for persecution and execution, with the notable exception of the brief Austrian rule. Part of the complex was turned into prison when Poland occupied the area at the conclusion of World War I, and the other part was made a police station, and it held the exact same configuration until 1996, when the prison was finally closed. It took the authorities another 13 years until they finally authorized the creation of this memorial, though some police forces still remain stationed in a corner of the complex, even though the scope and the scale of that police station has drastically been reduced after the fall of the Soviet Union. Now, the history of Lviv during World War II is divided into three parts. The First Soviet, which is the first occupation by the Soviet Union between 1939 and 1941, the Nazi occupation from 41 to 44, and the so-called Second Soviet occupation from 44 till 1991. It was the first Soviets who converted this prison from a regular prison into a prison for political inmates, alongside with the establishment of the office of NKVD, which was also within this prison. When the Nazis arrived, they preserved everything except for the NKVD office, which was converted into a Gestapo investigation office. It is this period between the end of the First Soviets and the Nazi occupation that is of greatest interest. The First Soviet occupation was marked, as anywhere else, by mass arrest amongst the civilians who dared to disagree with the Stalinist quote-unquote liberation. At first, it meant members of anti-Soviet paramilitary movements like Ukrainska Powstańska Armia and, more importantly, Organizacja Ukraińskich Nacjonalistów, which I don't think needs any translation, who were indeed amongst those arrested. But then, in the good old Soviet tradition, the policy extended to anyone who basically looked the wrong way to the NKVD. Before it even got the chance to process the inmates, the Soviets had another problem. They just got into war with the Nazis, and in 1941 they were on the receiving end, so basically it was a matter of days before the Nazis would invade Lviv and seize the control. So, on June 23, 1941, the Soviet-sent NKVD chief makes a radical decision to kill all the prisoners in Lviv. Not just this prison, but all those arrested by the NKVD in the city. There was no time for evacuation, they said, so they just killed all of them, including those who hadn't been tried or even accused of any crime, and even those who were scheduled for being released soon enough. All of them were shot, manually, one by one, and some bodies were dumped into the common grave in the courtyard. 1,681 were murdered in this prison. A bit over 4,000 in Lviv alone, as the Soviets were withdrawing. Nobody knew. The families didn't know. And since we know the Soviets were xenophobes, they killed everyone: Ukrainians, Poles, Jews, Armenians, all of them. As the Nazis were approaching, some of the prisoners were shot in their cells and their bodies were left there. This massacre took 5 days between June 23rd and June the 28th, 1941. The first thing the Nazis did when they occupied the city was to make a propaganda film about it. The only good thing is that the Nazis allowed the relatives to learn about the massacre and identify the bodies. Only 9 of the 1,681 bodies remained unidentified after this operation. This is actual footage from then. But soon after, the Nazis started using the prison for exactly the same purposes as the Soviets, as a political prison. In November 25, 1942, the Gestapo investigator on this prison decides to decimate the prison population and kill every 10th prisoner as a revenge for the fact that the Nazis failed to capture Dmytro Maivsky, a key member of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. And so they did, killing much more people than the Soviets. How many more? Well, official records speak about roughly 700,000 civilians killed in Lviv region alone between 1942 and 1944. That's a bit over a third of the total population at the time. When the Soviets re-annexed the region, they continued what they started in 1939 and used it as a political prison until 1991, even though Western European leftists, starting with Amnesty International and other freaks, were sure that there were no more political prisoners in the Soviet Union since the 70s. Of course, that was a lie. The Soviet Union maintained large populations of political prisoners until the very last day of existence of this totalitarian monster. We'll come back to this prison 2 videos from now when I'll publish the story of a political prisoner who also served time in this prison before he was sent in a labor camp in one of the many middles of bloody nowhere of the Soviet Union. But until then, let's continue the exploration. The next stop is the Greek Catholic Church from Ploshchak, Kropivnitskoho, the Neo-Gothic St. Olga and Elizabeth Church, or Церква Святых Ольги и Елизавети. One of the reasons the inside of the church is not that impressive is because between 1946 and 1991 the church was used as a warehouse, as it happened with virtually all churches of modern-day Ukraine under the Soviet boot. The building underwent capital renovations 10 years ago, as decades of being used as a warehouse damaged it quite severely. Anyway, the nicest thing is the view offered from the tower of the church. If you have breathing problems, don't try to climb up though. The stairs are tough, narrow, and there are a lot of them. The church is 85 meters tall, so until the place where I taped these panoramic images, there's narrow stairs for 35 floors. Then there are the little things of Lviv, such as the statue of Leopold Ritter von Sacher-Masoch, the man after whom we retain the word masochism. Unsurprisingly, the statue is in front of a BDSM-themed bar, and the tourists are encouraged to abuse the statue, just like Masoch himself would have wanted. Right next to this place, there's a very rich souvenir store where you can buy Putin-themed toilet paper, Putin-themed urinals, Putin-themed doormats, Putin-themed gay posters. You get the point. This is the center of Ukrainian nationalism, so if you want anti-Putin material, here's where you come. And the jokes at the expense of Putin really have no end in Lviv. There are many of these in Kyiv as well, but they do take a break from time to time in the capital city, but not here. Then there's this beauty, the Boyim family chapel. Unfortunately, I tried for 3 days in a row to get in, but to no avail. The working hours displayed at the entrance are not strictly respected, and to make things worse, there's kissing tourists everywhere, so it's hard to even take a proper picture, let alone decent footage. Too bad, the interior of this place is gorgeous. But I got luckier eventually, also after multiple tries, with the Latin cathedral nearby. But that's for the second part. Before we conclude, it's worth noting that Lviv is finally discovering another heritage of the city, the Armenians, who most of them fled before the mass killings began, but are now making a comeback. The ruins of the Armenian church were no longer exactly ruins, as work is being done to restore the Armenian-themed sites. And with that said, this concludes the first video dedicated to Lviv and the fourth episode of Freedom Alternative Western Ukraine Tour. In the next episode, we'll explore the glorious Latin Cathedral, the Pharmacy Museum, the Venetian Palace, and much more. But until then, keep calm and Slava Ukraini! Thank you for watching.